He served Germany as Vice-Chancellor and more recently as Foreign Minister. Sigmar Gabriel has been very outspoken on the issue of German soldiers in Afghanistan and has also questioned the US's counterinsurgency strategy there. After visiting Hebron and the Palestinian territories in 2012, Gabriel said the Palestinians were systematically discriminated against in what he called Israel's apartheid regime. In addition to his strong views on the Middle East, the German politician is not less opinionated when it comes to Europe, Russia, the US and even NATO. But with nationalist and unilateral agendas rising in recent years, is the West losing influence on global issues? Can Germany play more of a leadership role in the world? We hear more as Sigmar Gabriel talks to Al Jazeera. So, former Foreign Minister of Germany, Mr. Sigmar Gabriel, thanks so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thanks to you for the invitation.
So, you're here with the Doha Forum, which is all about trying to find common ground to face some common global problems. But does it seem to you like the world is heading sometimes in the wrong direction, the opposite direction? We just have to look at Brexit, how the APEC summit ended, trade tensions between the US and Europe, tensions within NATO, the rise of populism and so on.
You should not forget the climate issue.
Of course, that too.
Of course, the world was in a better shape some years ago, but I mean, I'm a committed social democrat. We are optimists by nature. So
you still think it's fixable?
I hope so. And I mean, at the end, it depends on the willingness of political leaders and, of course, of the willingness of our citizens. I think the citizens want to have a more stable situation around the globe.
But where does that optimism come from when you hear increasingly a sort of unilateralism, nationalistic rhetoric?
But if you go back some decades, if you would have asked me maybe in the 70s or the 80s when I was a soldier in the army in Germany, if German unification would be possible, I would say no, never. So we, as Germans, we learned that everything is possible. And if you look to the European Union, it's an amazing story. It shows to the rest of the world that it's possible to overcome hatreds, bitter hatreds, and to become first partners and then friends in only one generation after two horrible world wars. If people want to organize and to make peace, then they are able to do this.
Now, the Gulf region, of course, is no stranger to division either. Last year, you were quoted as saying on June the 6th, 2017, that the boycott of Qatar was particularly dangerous. A year and a half onwards, how destabilizing has the blockade been?
I mean, first of all, the good news was that it was not a military adventure. And that
could it have been?
We were scared about the situation then. And
did some countries have plans to invade Qatar?
I don't know if they had plans, but we had the feeling that it could be possible.
What gave you that feeling, though? Surely, as a foreign minister, you receive information, and it must have been based on something.
We discussed it with our American friends, and I think at that time the Secretary of State of the United States, Rex Tillerson, did a lot to prevent further escalation of the conflict. And our experience in Europe is sometimes it's like the First World War. We say we went into war into a sleeping wagon. Nobody was looking around. Everybody was heading in the same direction. At the end of the day,
you found yourself in a war.
Yes.
And you saw, so there was, what sort of indications suggested to you that some of the blockading countries might be thinking about invading?
I don't know if they had real plans, but our experience is that step by step, during an escalation of a conflict, at the end, it could end in a military conflict. And the same feeling had our US colleagues in that days. But nevertheless, I mean, it's obvious that it was dangerous. And we discussed with all our partners, with Qatar as well, it was the Emirates, some of the Saudis, how to de-escalate. And I think at that time, the US Secretary of State Tillerson did a great job for de-escalation, not to go further in the escalation steps.
Well, as you are aware, the UAE State Minister for Foreign Affairs, Anwar Gargash, says some of your statements in the Doha Forum about how the region was not far from military intervention are simply not accurate, not true. He's met with you before, and you should know better, basically. How do you respond to that?
What should he say? I mean, he's a state minister of the Emirates, and of course this would be like a press speaker. I'm an independent politician, and I'm saying today what I said last year and the year before. So I did. So
it's what he's saying is not accurate.
I don't know. I read only on Twitter, and I know under which conditions politicians sometimes have to act. So he is responsible for his statements. I know in what situation we were in that days, and I think everybody should be happy that there was no further escalation. I mean, the situation is not good. I think for the region, not only for the Gulf.
Should the blockade end?
Yes, of course. I mean, we tried a lot, and others as well, to bring the conflict partners closer together. But and by the way, the Qataris tried to end the conflict. We had a serious debate with our Qatari partners about terrorist organizations and financing, because the Saudis and the Emirates said Qatar is responsible for that, and they opened their books. We had a very serious debate between our intelligence services, together with the Americans, by the way, and I think they tried to convince everybody about the situation in Qatar, and they did a good job. Unfortunately, others did not move on. Hopefully,
do you think Europe can do more, should do more, apply more pressure perhaps on the blockading countries to end this one?
There is a saying in Germany by a very famous judge in our constitutional court. He says, sometimes democracy, or you can transfer it to the situation here, needs preconditions which they could not organize by itself. So the willingness of the political leaders, the willingness of the society must there. You cannot impose peace and conflict regulation from an outside perspective. Mm-hmm. You can offer some ideas, you can offer partnerships, and that Europe did, and others as well. Hopefully the region will come down, because at the end, I think, if you look from the economy side, uncertainty is the worst thing you can do for the economy.
Economic development.
And yes, and it's not tackling only Qatar, it's the whole region, because investors will be careful.
Wary of instability.
Yes, and instability. So there should be an economic interest to overcome the grievances.
Do you think the Trump-led White House in particular, not the US as a whole, I understand the nuanced differences between the State Department, between the Pentagon, between the White House, but the Trump-led White House's approach to the region, has it fanned the flames of divisions at times?
Our feeling at that time was that some partners in the region thought that they have something like a blanco check, that they could do whatever they want. And when we discussed with them and we said, look, we are of the same opinion like the State Department, the US, they answered to us, that's interesting, but we are only listening to the White House.
You wouldn't mind telling me which partners that was that told you that? Are we talking Saudi Arabia? Let's call a spade a spade.
I don't want to blame and don't want to finger point. If we want to come to solutions, I think it's not a good idea to blame somebody. I mean, I saw what Mr. Gargash did with me. I don't want to do it in the other way, in the same way. We
not to blame, but just for viewers to understand. Was this a process where you found yourself in the middle of trying to de-escalate a situation in which Saudi Arabia, or that side of the blockade, let's say, felt they're getting different signals directly from the White House, and therefore they can ignore the sort of advice they get from you?
If a superpower like the US is sending different signals from the White House, the foreign ministry, it can create very dangerous misconceptions. And my feeling at that time was that there were misconceptions because of the two different messages coming from the US. And it was not only my feeling.
Moving on to looking broadly at some of the episodes that have happened in this region, shall we say?
Episodes is a nice word.
Well, I'm trying to follow your lead now.
You should seem to be that you are a diplomat.
Miscalculation, some would say, by the Saudi Crown Prince towards Yemen, Qatar, the whole episode, shall we say, involving Lebanon's Prime Minister and whether or not he was detained, the Khashoggi affair. Do you think some in the West are concluding that a Saudi Arabia in which the Crown Prince has so much influence is not so much of a responsible security partner anymore?
Well, we saw what members of the Senate of the United States said in these days. And of course, Saudi Arabia is an important country. Everybody knows that. And by the way, we praise the Crown Prince for his reform efforts inside the country. But at the same time, we were very much scared about parts of his foreign policy. So it's not only black and white. Mm-hmm. But we saw that even the Americans and the members of the Senate were very much scared. And they are traditionally the strongest partner, the most important partner of the Saudis. But I always would say it's not black and white. There is a reform process inside the country which is amazing. But on the other hand side, as I said, there were some adventures and which create difficulties in the region. And we are very happy about the first steps in Yemen coming to a ceasefire, organizing humanitarian aid for the suffering people.
Who's responsible for those adventures? Is it not MBS, Mohammed bin Salman?
We think that he overestimated his position in the region. I mean, of course, maybe he had the feeling that whatever he is doing, he's backed by the White House. And you see, I mean, there was a criticism on human rights issues by the Canadian Foreign Minister. We have many experiences with partners who say you should not criticize me for human rights. It's not only Saudi Arabia which is acting on that, but nobody would withdraw the ambassador because another country, a foreign minister, raised the flag of human rights. And that shows us that they have the feeling that there are no rules they have to follow on, and that's dangerous.
Talking about human rights, do you think there should be an international investigation into the killing of Jamal Khashoggi?
First of all, it should be, we have to look what really the investigation in the United States will bring out. And of course, everybody has the feeling that there is a responsibility among the leaders of Saudi Arabia. But I'm very interested in looking at the details when the Senate and the US is publishing what they found out. We do not have any.
You don't have a personal...
No.
I mean, do you think the world should consider it acceptable? Do you think it's acceptable that months after the killing now, the Saudi investigation still hasn't even accounted for what happened to his body?
No, you see
Is that acceptable?
You see that we stopped, for example, our delivering of defense materials and capabilities after the Khashoggi case.
Do you think more countries should follow that?
I think so.
Okay, but I hate to press you, but your opinion...
I'm a politician since 30 years, so...
So I'm sure you're used to being pressed, but when you look at an investigation that hasn't even accounted for where a journalist's body is after he's gone in a consulate, many people say that's simply not an acceptable investigation.
Of course, it's not acceptable, and I mean, it's also a tragedy. We should not forget there are relatives. Khashoggi had a family, and I mean, the killing of Mr. Khashoggi is a catastrophe, but it's for the family and the relatives. It's a very bad situation that they are not even able to bury the body and to have a place where they can go to. So, for me, it's not only a political question; it's also a question of humanity.
Do you think the world will ever believe that MBS was not responsible for that killing?
In Europe, everybody thinks that there is a certain kind of responsibility. I don't know if it's personal order or people thought that it could be his wish. It's an open discussion in Europe, but everybody thinks that it will not, the case will not be organized like an accident.
Is Western policy on Syria now focused more on what to do with certain groups or elements there, whether they're armed groups, whether they're Iranians, rather than the broader political future of the country, which is being left to others?
Unfortunately, Europe plays no role in Syria.
Is that a mistake?
That
They
has
receive a lot of migrants and refugees.
Yes, that has to do with Europe itself. And Europe was never founded to be a global actor. The history of the European Union was to organize peace inside Europe and economic growth, but for the difficult parts of the world, the difficult jobs, some people say the dirty jobs, there were the responsibility of France, UK, and especially of the United States. Now, when the United States started to withdraw from the scene in Syria, we were able to see there is no vacuum in international politics. Where somebody went out of the door, some others will come in and
to fill it.
Yeah, and we saw now it's the ceasefire in Idlib. It's organized by Turkey and Russia. Europe doesn't play any role.
Should that change? Should Europe have more of a role?
I think Europe should step up in international affairs. Therefore, it's
and do what in Syria? What would you?
First of all, we should support the ceasefire in Idlib, and of course, I think at the end of the day, everybody wants to see Europe as part of the reconstruction process of Syria. The next step is that we should have under the UN umbrella in Geneva a constitutional reform. I'm very happy that the Turks and others try to hand over the process to the United Nations, and then Europe can play a role in this process. It has to be under the umbrella of the United Nations. I think that's the right way to do it.
What about a role in the Middle East peace process? Do you really believe that the new initiative, which the world is still awaiting for, from the US, is really going to bring peace between Israelis and Palestinians?
Everybody's hoping for that, but
do you think those hopes are well founded?
The difficulty, nobody knows what is this famous plan.
Right.
We will see it. I think, unfortunately, the United States take one side of the conflict's partners, and so it is not longer seen as neutral. Maybe it was never neutral. Everybody has a specific opinion onto that. But now, after the Trump came into power in the White House, there were some decisions like moving the capital to Jerusalem, not like the Canadians to West Jerusalem, but as well to the east part. The saying about the settlements and others.
That's undermined, you think, their credibility?
I think it's undermining their credibility, but let's hope that this plan will reflect the situation in the region.
What was it that you saw in Hebron that made you say it reminded you of apartheid South Africa?
There was a famous bazaar in the center of Hebron, and now there's nothing, because on the ground level there are the Arab citizens, the traditional ones, and the first level there are people which came mostly from Canada and from the US, and they were very much aggressive to the people who lived there at the bazaar. And I think that's the situation where you can see that creates hatred, not common understanding, not peace. And I was very much depressed seeing the situation. And by the way, there were young soldiers from the Israel Defense Forces. They felt themselves in a very difficult situation. They were not happy to serve in this atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Europe can play a bigger role in the Middle East peace process? It's always been dominated by the US, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. I mean, we saw that countries like Sweden, they were able to invite people to Stockholm. Now, in the Yemen process, the Oslo process was an interesting process. So Europe can play, but we cannot enforce the process. It has to come out of the region. Mm-hmm. And of course, without the Americans today, it's impossible. to bring the both sides together.
Talking of the Americans, do you believe a Donald Trump-led America is still the same reliable guarantor of European security that America has been since the end of World War II?
That's a great debate, big debate.
What do you think?
I think that America.
You've dealt directly with this issue.
I think that America changed before Trump. I mean, it was Barack Obama who said, as the first American president, that America is a Pacific nation. All presidents before said America is a transatlantic nation. So America is looking much more to the Pacific region, of course, to China. And yes, we need the United States as a security partner in NATO. And I personally, I mean, I grew up direct at the border to East Germany. And I knew that only because of the Americans and some others, we lived in a very peaceful situation. And I know without the Americans and their intervention in the Second World War, I would have been in a country under the pressure of Stalin or Hitler.
But so Donald Trump, many would argue, is not Kennedy. He's not even Obama, who said we're a Pacific nation. He's on the record.
But I don't think that's an issue of Mr. Trump. The country
he's called NATO obsolete. That is an issue of Mr. Trump, isn't it? When you say something,
but
no American president
the country itself is changing, and hopefully the United States will not be as it is today with Mr. Trump as a president. But I think it will never be the same like it was before, because the world is changing, and I see we are entering maybe a G2 world between China and US are the two antipodes, and the question is what kind of role Europe wants to play, and therefore there are some different fields where we have to step up. One of the fields is security and defense.
Should there be a common European army? That's been floated. I think the President of France has spoken very clearly about that.
Hopefully,
you agree with him?
Hopefully, but I think it will not start as a European army, but it should start with a better integration of the European military capabilities. This, by the way, would spend a lot of money. We would be more efficient, and step by step, yes, I'm a supporter of the idea.
Is that not an admission of we need to have a backup plan for the reliance on America?
No, it's not. It's not a backup plan, and it's not in a competition to NATO. But there will be in future some responsibilities, or there could be some responsibilities where the Americans would say that's not our job. It's direct in front of your door, so you should step in. And I think with good reasons. It was very convenient for us. We were in a comfort zone. We say, okay, we can concentrate ourselves on economic and social progress, and for the rest we had the Americans.
Germany cannot do that going forward.
No, anymore. I think the world will be much more inconvenient for us as Europeans.
Does Germany need to get ready for military interventions abroad?
There are two lessons in Germany after 2 world wars. First is never again, and then never alone.
Should Germany perhaps lead the European effort globally sometimes now?
Yes, of course. I mean, Germany is the biggest economy. We have more than 80 million citizens, so everybody asks us to lead. But I think Europe, that's maybe the difference to other parts of the world. In Europe, the bigger countries do not have more rights than the smaller ones. Malta, with 400,000 citizens, they have the same rights in the European Union than Germany with 82 million. That's the fundamental rule in Europe. Germany was always successful when our leaders recognized, oh, there are more small countries, more small member states in the European Union than bigger ones, and we have to join hands with the smaller ones in the same way like we do it with the bigger ones.
Sigmar Gabriel, former German foreign minister, thanks so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thanks for the invitation.